It's finally happened! GameCube games are coming to the Switch's online service! But the caveat that it's only gonna come to the Switch 2's online service, and I think that's weird. Give me a few minutes and I'll spill the beans. Alright, so I'm gonna have to go ahead and give myself a little bit of a pat on the back, because I did kind of predict that Nintendo was gonna save GameCube games for the Switch 2. Now that it's actually happened, my reaction's pretty much like, really? Just the Switch 2, not the Switch 1? And like, I get Nintendo wants to sweeten the pot for the new hardware, but like, is anybody out there really gonna buy a Switch 2 just to play a handful of GameCube games? And don't get me wrong, the GameCube is one of my favorite consoles of all time, and even with how much hype it's gotten in recent years, I still think it's kinda underrated. But I don't know, I just don't think it's worth buying a brand new console just to play games that are decades old at this point. I mean, it's not like the original Switch isn't capable of running GameCube games, seeing as how, well, it could literally run upgraded GameCube games and even has an official GameCube controller. So I mean, really, GameCube games' exclusives to the Switch 2 isn't about the more powerful hardware, but rather that Nintendo's just holding back for the sake of encouraging people to buy the upgrade. I'm not necessarily saying that's completely wrong, seeing as how the above-average sized den never said that the Switch 1 can't handle GameCube games, so they don't have to admit that they just don't want GameCube games on the Switch 1. They can do whatever they want, but make no mistake, that's definitely what's happening here. Nintendo's holding back on purpose, even though they definitely could put GameCube games on the original Switch. And if you don't think the below-oversized den's capable of holding games back just to sway people to buy the newer hardware, then take a look at the 3DS. The original 3DS could run Game Boy Advance games perfectly fine if you had them through the Ambassador program, but for some reason, you had to buy the new 3DS model if you wanted to play Super Nintendo games. Like, I know that Game Boy Advance and Super Nintendo are two different systems, even though they're pretty much the same, but does anybody out there honestly believe that the original 3DS was incapable of running Super Nintendo ROMs? Well, of course it could have, but Nintendo didn't want to, which surely cost them a noticeable amount of sales, seeing as how not one single person on the entire planet bought a new 3DS just to play Super Nintendo games, just like how nobody's gonna buy a Switch 2 to play GameCube games. And stop writing that comment saying you're gonna just to be a contrarian. We both know you're not gonna do it. Sure, it is a nice perk, but that's not why you're buying a Switch 2, so there's really no good reason to not just let regular Switch owners play GameCube games too. Early Switch 2 adopters aren't gonna be babies about not having cake all to themselves, and I can see a handful of Switch 1 owners who actually would subscribe to the Switch's online service to play a few GameCube games. Especially when it comes to the games that are expensive as frig these days, but yeah, that brings us to the games. The other weird thing about GameCube games coming to the Switch 2. Obviously, the GameCube library is more rock solid than my stepdad watching any given episode of SmackDown, but like, some GameCube games have already been remastered, you know, like Wind Waker, for example. So which version are we gonna get, the Wii U remaster or the GameCube original? Obviously, we already know it's the original GameCube version, but like, that's kind of a letdown, isn't it? And don't get me wrong, I have absolutely no problem with the 4:3 aspect ratio, even in high definition, seeing as how I do HD 4:3 when I make skate videos, but like, really? No Swift sail? Although, to be honest, I kinda love sailing through the ocean when it takes longer, because one, the sailing theme in Wind Waker is absolutely majestic and soothing, plus, seeing islands slowly approaching builds anticipation, but I'm sure I'm the only one who feels that way. And even if I'm not, you could always just not use the Swift sail, and all the other benefits from the Wii U version are gonna be missing in this, so lame. What about all the games that were already remastered for the Switch specifically? Are they just gonna be excluded from the GameCube service altogether? I mean, we did get the original Link's Awakening on Game Boy Color and the HD remaster on the Switch, but like, that's not really the same thing, I guess. It's still a remake, I fully admit it, but I just don't look at it the same way personally. But my point is that if we got both versions of Link's Awakening, then does that mean we might still get an overpriced Wind Waker HD port? How about the original Thousand Year Door with the uncensored dialogue but censored Vivian? What about Pikmin's 1 and 2 without the perks of the HD remasters? I don't know, and I think that's weird. Not bad, necessarily, just weird, you know? In fact, I'd actually say it is good, because right now, some GameCube games are way too friggin' expensive, and there's no official way to play them, so it would be nice if, say, Smash Bros. Fans had a chance to finally actually play the Fire Emblem game that I came from, you know? Not only that, but Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes is something a lot more people need to be talking about. And even though we won't get extra perks from the remasters, I do like the idea of playing a preserved game from the past as they were, except for HD and save states, and wireless controllers, yada yada, you get it. Although the GameCube did have the Wavebird, you know what I mean though. But then there's the whole matter of how Nintendo's releasing their older games in the first place with the subscription model, and honestly, I don't think it's all that bad, but it would still be nice to give people the option to buy these games so they don't have to permanently subscribe to something. I get that subscriptions are the priority, I just hate that we don't even have the option to buy them.
I don't want to rent, I want to own.
Then go get a job.
With Nintendo releasing controllers for each service, though, I kinda like the idea of Wii remotes being sold to play Wii games authentically, or even Wii U games with the gamepad if they ever get that bold. As much of a pain in the ass as that'd be for everybody, I'm serious, I'd love that. The Wii U gamepad was underrated for certain games. But for now, though, we're in this weird little spot where Nintendo's releasing older versions of GameCube games after they already pulled the trigger on some re-releases. And it kind of feels like all the GameCube games that were remastered up until this point were only done so out of desperation, like being late into the Switch's life cycle without that many new games, or, you know, the Wii U tanking and needing something to save things. Like, the original GameCube versions of these games are still great, but they're ultimately lesser than the upgrades.
Creatures, you lesser thans!
Anyway, that's all for today, but if you got a kick out of my awkward rambling though, then you should check out my video I made on all the Capcom games for the GameCube, but if you'll excuse me though, I gotta go water my snake. Later!